All right, guys, so we're going to look at our final exam study guide for this school year. It'll actually be 2021 semester. So start off quickly here, and some of these we'll skip, and you can go back and look up later possibly, but we'll try to get through this as quickly as we can. So an adaptation is simply some change that's used to survive. And adaptations come in lots of comes in lots of forms. You might have thicker fur, or you might have longer legs to run faster, different things like that. Okay. The levels of biological organization, we got population. Brain died all of a sudden. Population. Community. I got these out of order. We got community, population, and organism. So organism is same species, population, same species, same place, same time, and then community is more than one population, okay? Describe the relationship between population, predator, and prey. You know, the short relationship, one goes up, the other goes down. If you have a lot of predators, then the number of preys will decrease. And as the number of preys decrease, that means the predators can't survive anymore. Survive anymore, and they would die out, which means the preys would increase. So that's an inverse relationship there. Biotic and abiotic. So biotic is living. Abiotic is non-living. Give an example. So abiotic, non-living factors are things like air, water, temperature, sun, temperature, soil. Yeah. Biotic factors, is just animals, plants, things of that nature, animals and plants, how they work together and so forth. All right, describe what happens to the available energy as it moves through the tropic levels of a system. So the energy is going to do what as we go down? The energy does what now? Right. Decreases by 10% each time, okay? So you have 10% less each time. Draw an example of an energy pyramid. Okay, so at the bottom we got producers. Okay, and then we got our, go ahead.
Primary.
Yeah, primary. Consumer. Secondary. Consumer. And then tertiary. All right, and then if we had some energy, we might have 1,000 energy down here, and then it decreases by 10, so we'd get 100 at this level, 10, and then finally 1, okay? So the energy decreases as we go up by a factor of 10. All right, good deal. Cycling of matter. Okay, so how do fossil fuels affect the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Fossil fuels, when we burn fossil fuels, more carbon dioxide is released. All right, and so, of course, if you release more of it, then that's going to increase the greenhouse gases and possibly the greenhouse effect. Okay? All right, good deal. And identify each of these biogeochemical cycles. This is here showing the burning of fossil fuels from a car, releasing carbon. So this is the carbon cycle. All right. This is condensation, precipitation, surface runoff, lake, soil, evaporation. This is water. Over here, so one's a little bit tricky, but weathering of a rock, decomposition of fungi and bacteria, animal and plants. This is phosphorus cycle. All right, and our plants outside needed phosphorus, okay? And so one way they can get phosphorus is they can't wait on the rocks to decrease, so we can add fertilizer to give them that. All right, and then down here at the end, we got nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So this one is nitrogen. One of the things you need to know about nitrogen is bacteria. We have nitrogen-fixing bacteria. That's one of the roles of bacteria. Up here about phosphorus, we want to know, comes from those rocks. So that's kind of the key point. Carbon comes from burning of fossil fuels. And don't forget about over here, the plants are pulling that back in. That's called a carbon sink, something that pulls the carbon back in out of the environment. Okay, so a little extra additions. What type of succession is shown below? There's two types of succession. This one starts with rock. So as soon as I see that word exposed rock, I know this is primary. So this is some type of environmental impact, like a mudslide. That would be secondary. The first plants that come in right here, the first plants are lichens and moss. So you might make a note, that's the first plants that come in. All right. List three main differences between primary and secondary succession. So one starts with rocks. Okay. Two, over here starts with environmental, or I should say starts with old soil. There's some old soil there. And over here, starts with new soil or with rocks. I think that's kind of the main differences right there. Once you get past that initial stage, pretty much from here down is the same. Okay, once you get that, pretty much the same. All right, good deal. Energy resources, is that what you got next? Okay, all right, I see now. Yeah, I know where that should go now. Diversity of life is next thing we studied. What's the smallest unit of life? Yeah, cell, we know that. How are prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms different? So me and you are eukaryotic, and this is a true nucleus. And so prokaryotic is no nucleus. Are photosynthetic organisms like plants, an animal, or a fungi? How are photosynthetic organisms like plants different from animal or fungi? And y'all guys should know the main differences. Plants are auto-producers. I don't know if that's a true term. Autotrophs. They produce their own food, right? Okay, autotrophs produce their own food. Name an adaptation. Gosh, there's a lot of adaptations, but remember, an adaptation helps it survive. Okay, adaptations help it survive. So, for example, one we saw in the video of the flower was it buds or opens at night so that the desert heat doesn't kill it. A snake in the desert would cover itself with sand. So one of the adaptation. Arctic fox, thick fur. We're not going to ask you specific examples of these. We're going to ask you to read a scenario and you pick out the adaptation. But those are types of adaptations. All right, what two abiotic factors most affect the biome? Those are the two we did on these climatographs, and they're shown on these climatographs, and that is temperature and rainfall, which together makes well, it's going to make the climate, but yes, you definitely do have to take into account the temperature for how that would affect greenhouse. What are the two climatographs? Identify each biome represented. So right here we see that this is a higher temperature, and that temperature stays even, so that's a clue right there that it's tropical. And then we see we got a lot of rainfall. We got a little bit of a season, though. We have a rainy season and a little bit less rainy season. So the bars are the rain. And the line is the temp. Okay? All right. So for this, I'm going to say tropical rainforest. All right, over here, we got temperature going up and coming down. So we do have somewhat of a temperature season. We have a little bit of a summer and then winter over here. But it's not a lot of change in temperature. It's only about let's see, goes from about 15 degrees temperature. And then what do we have with our rainy season? It goes down to little. So we have very little rain. And so we know temperature, low rain, desert. That's what I would choose, okay? Desert. Now, if you have other choices that had less rain, you might maybe you could create an argument for this is a grassland because the amount of rain. But I think we have, even during the desert, there's a rainy season, but it's still extremely low amounts of rain, okay? All right, good deal. We have another graph there. So we got our desert, we got our rainforest, and so that means it's probably left our grasslands. All right, and so then we have pretty much steady rain. So we have enough rain to grow grass, but not enough to grow trees. And the reason we don't have enough rain enough to grow trees is because the temperature is low. So when the temperature is low, the trees won't grow. We don't have enough water. We have more water than a desert, but not enough for a forest. So combining those gives us a grassland. What are some benefits such as wetlands, such as those around Georgia coast? The coastal wetlands, they filter the water before it returns back out. They provide weather protection. Okay, so the islands can absorb some of that weather before it comes into coastland. Okay. All right, describe the role of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. Greenhouse gases are not bad. Greenhouse gases trap heat. The problem is there's too much greenhouse gases where it becomes a bad thing. So the greenhouse gases basically trap heat. So at night it doesn't get freezing cold. Describe how an increase in carbon dioxide affects the temperature on our planet. Okay, so carbon dioxide traps more heat than pure air. All right, so if it traps more heat than pure air, we're going to eventually increase the temperature. All right, good deal. Which human activity releases the most greenhouse gases? Yeah, burning of fossil fuels. All right, define each of the following. So we quickly go through these. Indicator species indicates or tells of health of an ecosystem. Endangered species, risk of being lost. You guys know that. Invasive species is not native. And not always, but usually causes harm due to not having a natural predator. Endemic species is native to a specific region. So, for example, you got to be careful. Deer are native to Georgia, but deer are not endemic to Georgia, just a specific region. And then, of course, we got keystones, which other species rely on. All right, why is it important for an ecosystem to have a high biodiversity? Ecological resilience. We want it to be able to come back after some destruction. Come back after some type of destruction. So ecological resilience. The more biodiversity you have, if a disease or something comes into your forest, it doesn't wipe out all the trees. It just wipes out one or two. So ecological biodiversity is called ecological resilience. Yep, that puts us at energy resources. Yeah. Okay. Energy resources. What percent of our nation's energy is renewable? Did anybody look that up? Because off the top of my head, I am not sure. Yeah. 28. I was thinking it was around 22 or something, but I can't remember. It's one of those we're going to have to go back and check on.
208.
Well, it can't be 208 because that's higher than 100%.
I thought it was 12%.
Sir?
I thought it was
12%? All right, we have to go back and look at that percentage.
I'll look it up early.
Okay, so we have someone that's looked that up for us, 12%. My apologies, I could not remember that off the top of my head. The point is renewable. Are we using enough renewable? Not at 12%, because that means 88% is non-renewable, okay? So that's the point there. It's not so much what is the actual percentage, it's more about, hey, you're not using very much renewable energy. You need to think about switching over that. All right, so some following renewable sources, what they use for. So hydroelectric is water, and we use that for electricity. You remember we got electricity, and then the other ones that we could, transportation, and the other one, heating. So hydroelectric, electricity, geothermal is heat of earth or the dirt, and we can use that for electricity, and it can be used for heating homes. Solar, y'all know what solar is. Solar is used electricity and heating, and wind is just used for electricity. We can't use wind to heat our home, okay, but you can use it to produce electricity. What are some benefits and drawbacks of fossil fuels? Well, the benefits are it's I would say efficient, yeah, that we use it for transportation. I also want you to think about here that it releases a lot of energy. In other words, the amount of energy you get for a gallon of gas is way more than the amount of energy you get for a solar panel. The solar panel's got to be so much bigger to get the same energy. So you get a lot of energy out of it. Same thing for nuclear. Drawbacks, of course, release greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, and pollution to environment. All right, guys, y'all know that. All right, some land, water, and natural resources. Okay, so how does human population growth affect the food supply and food demand in terms of GMOs? So, why GMOs is genetically modified organisms? Why did we do GMOs? Why did we monoculture? Why did we do all of these things? Population growth. How is our population growing? Linear or exponentially? Exponentially. So it's growing extremely quickly. Therefore, we need more food, better food, in shorter amount of time. So that's what we've done here, okay? Monocultures, GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Monocultures growing one plant. That's how we farm today. You know, we're growing all onions or all corn or all whatever out there. Desertification, this is a negative. I should have took a picture for you guys last night out on number 1 highway. There's 2 big old fields. I mean, it would not surprise me if it's 1,000 acres between both sides, and it is completely plowed. And I thought about that. If a big windstorm or something came up, the amount of erosion that might have come from that. But desertification becomes unusable soil due to plowing and tilling, and then some type of drought or weather condition comes in behind it. The Green Revolution is a change in farming practices And why did we have to make those changes? Because we're exponentially growing our human population and we got to feed everybody. Okay, so what are some of the farming practices? Well, monoculture, irrigation, GMOs, those are all really part of the Green Revolution. What's one innovation that's a result of the Green Evolution? Irrigation, farm equipment. We also did different pesticides. Okay, things like that. All right, describe the environmental impacts of urbanization. So, because we got so many people growing so quickly with so many, and we live in one little area, we got some problems. And one of the problems is we create heat islands, areas that are hotter than surrounding. Hotter than surrounding areas, heat islands, usually caused by concretes in cities. It occurs with city wastewater treatment. Well, I mean, if you got an urban area, you got to treat all the wastewater. We won't put out a whole big thing here, but what's the environmental impacts of wastewater treatment? We're removing clean water, and we need to clean before we release. It's hard to write that in a short sentence. I mean, basically, you guys saw the wastewater treatment, you saw the impact, right? You're pulling all this water out of the aquifer. That water's got to go somewhere, back into the environment. But in between getting the clean out of the aquifer, obviously we contaminate it, do whatever. It needs to be cleaned before it returns to the environment. Waste disposal, landfills, same type of thing there. I mean, what are we doing with that trash? How are we returning that material back to the environment? You know, it's part of that whole big cycling system. What are the environmental impacts of landfills? Well, you got to think about land use, because once you use that land for a landfill, then there is no other purpose for the land. Okay, the land use is one problem. Okay, just the pollution or trash, that we have to store and take care of. Land usage. Well, when we build cities, we have less green space. And we did a pretty good study on all that, how the heat islands and the different things affect it. So part of the problem with urbanization is the land usage. And some of the environmental effects of the land usage is we don't have green spaces. We don't have places to provide food. The land becomes polluted. Some of those things. How do we get our water? Aquifers, okay, or surface water. Depends on where you live. We study that. We live in an area that gets our water from an aquifer, okay? All right, finishing up here pretty quick. Won't have much left to do. The 6 stages, we're not going to ask you all specific 6 stages, but we do want you to realize that the first thing you do is you have to screen or filter large particles. Plastics and such as that, or any metals that make it through, or rocks for that matter, because remember, the storm drain off and the sewage water can get into the same pipe. Pump, we're not worried about. A pump pumps it from different stages. You saw that. Aerator adds oxygen for microscopic organism. Remove sludge and the scum, and I'm just going to add those together. I'm going to say that ends up in the landfill. Those are solid materials that eventually have to be put in a landfill somewhere. You couldn't just dump those right back out to the pure environment, okay? Kill bacteria, some type of chemical treatment. And at our plant, they have a chlorine treatment, and then in discharge, we return it to Enviro. And the two ways we returned it to the environment was one is literally a sprinkler system that returns it, and then one is just a pipe. Once it goes through that pipe, it's released right back into the creek. And you saw parts of that on our little trip. So where does the solid organic matter go after wastewater has been treated? We already addressed that up there, but it goes back to landfill, then returns back to the environment. All right, how is our waste disposed of? What are we doing with all our waste right now? We're doing very little recycling. Most of it is buried, right? Buried in a landfill. Okay, excuse my handwriting. Where does the leachate go? Leachate is the water that moves through the trash. Where does that water end up going? Yeah, we got to take that in a big holding pond, right? And then eventually it goes to the wastewater treatment. So we hold in a pond and then to wastewater plant. What solutions are available for waste disposal? I mean, right now our solutions would be recycle and use less. That is part of our big thing about the waste disposal is, like plastics, we're not going to convince you, use less. We're not going to convince you to stop using plastics, but maybe we can convince you to use less plastics and recycle what we have, okay? So with plastics, don't forget about the term single-use and multi-use plastics. We also did some stuff with the waste video about food, so keep that in mind. Waste versus trash, that's been a unique thought for me. How do you define those and how are they different? So I appreciate you tuning in and listening up, and hopefully you're a little better prepared for the final.